Now that the Jaguars have named James Gladstone the GM, now it's game on. And I think he is up for it. We'll talk about him and more here on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
No doubt about that. It is your team every day here on Locked On Jaguars. We thank you for making us your first listen. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, ones that you watch and ones that you listen to. Make sure you tap in to those locations each and every day so you do not miss an episode. Shout out to the everydayers for joining us here every single day on Locked On Jaguars. We are glad to have you. And if it's your first time, I hope you stick around and come back. Here's what we're going to talk to. What is in the draft and what is in free agency? We'll get to that. By the time we get to the end of the show, I'll try to hold myself back and not kind of venture over there. I always do that a little bit, but we'll make sure we get to it. What happens next, like the very, very next step? Well, they went to Indy last night after the press conference yesterday, so we can get to that. And at first, we'll talk about the Gladstone effect. And what I mean when I say the Gladstone effect, it's a new day. It's a new day. It has been a new day ever since we knew that the Jaguars were going in a different direction with their franchise. Got a lot of young guys in the building, guys that look and act and talk just like a whole bunch of the fan base that has really, really supported this team over the years. So we're going to open our hearts up and give them a shot, man, because they need it. The Jaguars needed an infusion of new ideas and freshness to the franchise. And shout out to Shad Khan and everyone else involved for allowing that to happen. It's very, very hard and very, very difficult, though, when you don't really see someone do their job every single day. And none of us really actually see GMs do their job every single day. But being around, whether it be Dave Caldwell or Trent Baalke, Shaq Harris in the past, you kind of knew, especially with Gene Smith, you kind of knew exactly where their head was. You know, Gene was going to go to all the Group of 4 schools now and some Division II and some Division III schools. He wasn't going to sit around here and go to the SEC and watch those dudes too much. Everybody knew that. The thing is, though, is when James Gladstone says that they want guys that are tangibly rich and just bring them into the ecosystem, and they're going to ask them to do nothing but be themselves. Let me decipher that for a little bit. I believe that what he's saying is, and this is just my small interpretation of it, from a larger perspective, I absolutely understand where he's coming from. And it just sounds like, don't basically go out and get guys to come in here and expect them to do things you've never seen them do before. And don't be asking guys to do things that not only that you've never seen them do before, but just it isn't conducive to who they are, and it's not conducive to the particular talent that they have. Your system should be set up so that every player that you go out and acquire, and this is a very, very important point, that you go out and acquire fits into that, and you have a very specific role for them, as opposed to maybe the players that you have inherited that don't have that those traits or those characteristics. While you can find a way to try to implement those things, it's like pushing, a square peg through a round hole. That might give you some idea also about the process that they're going to go through when evaluating the guys that are already on the roster. Now, of course, somebody asked him about him. He said there's a lot of talented players here. Of course, we know that. They picked high in the draft every single year for just about the last 10 or 12 years, with the exception of one or two seasons. And so that there's some talent here. We've seen the fact that there's some talent here. It just almost never seemed like everything went together, right? And gone are the days when general managers just go out and say, well, just get me the most talented player and we'll figure it out. Well, first of all, you got to know what it is. What are you trying to figure out? You have to know who you are and what you want to do and how you want to go about doing it and how you want to play and how you want to win. And that's one thing about this staff that I know when you hear them talk, everybody kind of sounds the same, right? And I think Liam Cohen did a really, really good job of getting like-minded people that understand, that speak his language, and I've heard that on multiple occasions, that speak his language, that understand his method of teaching, understands his method of coaching, because they all came from that same thing. It's about getting guys that are complementary to each other, and that's another word that you've heard a lot of. And I noticed what happened is a lot of the adjectives that are being used to describe who they are and what they want to be are all about unifying. They're all about collaboration. It's another word. They're all about being on one accord and being together. While it does not mean that's groupthink, because there will be disagreement within that, the disagreement that will be in it will be good disagreement, because it's probably meant to push further thought and to evoke, some sort of really big time process of taking a closer look at things, as opposed to the indifference or the disagreements being selfish related or motivated, or that have intentions that don't benefit the team. And so that on the surface is what I think it means. It also means that they won't be throwing, and I'm going to say this, they won't be throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks. I heard two coaches in the last 8-9 years say that, 7-8 years, and it drove me crazy. Because to me, just trying new things means you don't know what you're looking for and you don't know what you have. You see, the game isn't on Sunday, you don't go out there and just try stuff. You have to be more intentional and more deliberate than that. And the Jaguars always looked like a team that was trying to figure it out, thus the slow starts in games. Well, what can we get away with? Let's see if we can push the line with this, or maybe this will work, or building everything around, building a game plan around the perceived weaknesses of the other team. How about this? How about you know what your strengths are and say, this is who we are. Now we're going to trick you a little bit. We ain't going to present it the way you think it's going to be presented, but this is the way it is. You can attack weaknesses, but you also have to play to your strengths. But in order for you to play to your strengths, you got to know who you are. And that goes back to what he says, James Gladstone, when he says, all they basically have to do is come in here and be themselves. So that means that it is the onus of the general manager and the coaching and the scouting department to know who they're looking for. First of all, to know what they want to do. They want to know what type of player they're looking for, what need they have, what that player's work ethic is, what that player's skill set is, what his mindset is when it comes to preparation and training. Is he a self-motivated guy? Okay, now let me go find him. Whether it's position specific or attitude specific, let me find that dude and let that guy who does that thing really well come in here and do that thing really well for us, because we want guys that can do that particular thing. It's going to be very pointed and very, very targeted. I think you're going to see dudes that love the work. And when I say love the work, I don't mean dudes that are accepting of the work. I don't mean guys that are willing to work hard. That's just, to me, that's too shallow. I want them to have guys that absolutely love the work, that love football, that love preparation. Everybody always talks about the Mamba mentality, but the Mamba mentality really with the late, great Kobe Bryant is the love for it, man. It's like I've always said this, and anybody that's heard this podcast, you've heard me say this before. I want guys that love the process of putting the work in. They love the challenge of getting smarter. They love all of that stuff. And see, to me, I think that's what they're looking for. Football playing Jessies is what we used to call them. The ones that won a lot of championships with New England, the kind of guys that won a lot of championships with Kansas City, and I know I just mentioned two of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of this game, maybe the two best. And I know that goes a long way into helping you, but they couldn't have done this. Those quarterbacks couldn't have done what they did without their coaches, without being in an environment where they absolutely love the grind of the game. So what happens next? Finding guys that love the grind of the game. The first thing is they're at the combine right now. They're going to take a look at those guys. That has its own independency. And then they're going to come back in and start working on free agency and evaluating their own players. Now, I'm going to talk about that, and it's going to be very, very important because I did this. I did a mock draft the other day, and I never really do mock drafts, but I did it in a sense for engagement, but the engagement is aimed at showing you why I never do mock drafts without worrying about free agency first. However, I actually did worry about free agency first, but what I did not do was tell anyone who I got in free agency. I'm going to explain some of the responses that I have, and I'm going to show you why trying to figure out what these guys are going to do moving forward without having a whole big, long history of what they have done to set precedents is going to be very, very difficult for us all. And that's why we feel like we're on a roller coaster. I'll talk about that more here on Locked On Jaguars. All right, rolling along here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen here. I'm Tony Wiggins. Talking about the Gladstone effect, James Gladstone, how this franchise is now going to move forward. My man said game on yesterday, and I'm going to tell you why I love that. I love it because that's kind of the attitude that I have always had when it comes to when the business has to get done. Let's go. Let's do it for the sport. Let's do it. I'm trying to compete with everybody all the time when it comes to things that are meant to be competing or competitive. Not every day. I think too many people do too much of that stuff. But when it comes time to, okay, we're going to play this game, like you sit me down and play poker or bid whist, man, I am locked in, right? It's also the way I feel sometimes when I make my wagers on sports. I'm locked in. I'm like, y'all ain't going to beat me. I'm like that with fantasy football. I'm like that with everything. And game on to me does not sound like arrogance. Game on to me sounds like I'm gonna meet you right where the rubber meets the road, and we're gonna get this thing moving. We're gonna get this thing moving in the right direction. And it sounds like someone who is very, very confident in their skill set to do that. And the confidence doesn't come from arrogance. The confidence comes from work ethic and the work that you put in and the results that have come from that work. I hear he was very, very instrumental in helping the Rams build the roster that they've built over the last few years. Some of those years when they didn't even have first-round draft picks. I like the thoughtful approach to football. Think about last year when the Rams got Jared Verse and Braden Fisk. Now, because I'm a Florida State supporter, I knew the kind of ilk those guys were made of, right? Maybe some other people didn't. But the insight that I have on those two guys were hard workers. Love the grind, love the process. I used to see Jared Verse walking into practice when I was looking online, and Jared Verse sounded like a dude who was headed to the club. He didn't sound like he was a dude who was ready to run around in 100-degree weather for 3 hours getting yelled at. He sounded and acted like a guy that was headed to a bachelor party. And that's the enthusiasm for the work is the thing that gets me. We can always look and talk about, well, they found this guy, and they found that guy, and they found Puka, and they found this guy. How did they do that? No, you know what they did? They weren't looking for certain traits and characteristics when other people were worried about other stuff. They found other traits and characteristics and things that they could fit into their, like I say, the ecosystem. And that's a word that I said that to Odell Higgins at the Senior Bowl. I walked up to him, hey, man, all the good things, all these years you've been putting in the ecosystem. And he smiled at me. So people that use that word, for the most part, understand exactly where I'm coming from when they're talking about ecosystem. So let's just talk about your house that you live in, right? Your house is your castle. Whatever goes on in there, right, wrong, or indifferent, is the way you roll, right? You don't want anything coming in there that's going to disrupt that. And anybody that allows disruption in their house is a fool. All right. So this Jacksonville Jaguars thing, that's our house, right? And he's the gatekeeper. He's responsible, him along with everybody else. They're responsible for the type of people that they want into that house, because everybody's going to have a function. Okay. We're all going to have a function. And the thing is he sounds like He's not just going to be the kind of GM that goes out and gets players and say, look, I know they had you doing that, but we think you can do something else. This is what I need you to do. It sounds like to me he's more of a GM that says, that thing you've been doing, that thing that you do very, very well, we need that here in our organization. And we're going to even give you more support so you can go out and do that particular thing and keep working really, really hard at doing it. Everybody's an expert at one thing, at least minimum, and that is being yourself. Now, sometimes people don't take advantage of the fact that they're an expert. That's why I can't stand people that act like other folks. You have to be yourself unapologetically. There's another word that he used yesterday that I always use. You have to unapologetically know who you are and be unapologetically yourself. But it's up to the GM to align that unapologetic person with an unapologetic organization that are also going in the same direction. You ever picked up something and it was exactly what you needed? That's the feeling that I think the Jaguars, that's what I think they're on to right now. And I think everybody's in lockstep in order to get that done. So what's next? The combine. Of course, finding those people that understand the mission, that while it may be new to us and hard for us to figure out what it is, they know what it is because they all speak the same language and they know each other. The hardest thing for us is figuring out what that is. Because when I usually do mock drafts and all of that and free agency, I do it on tendencies. Well, I don't have any tendencies for these guys. I know where they came from and I know the type of things I think they're going to find out, as I just described earlier. The main thing being smart, hardworking football players that love the grind. But still, you still just don't know, right? You still just don't know. So after the combine, they'll come back and they'll have a strategy. I think the fact finding of the combine will tell them what they need to do in free agency to fortify their team. They'll know what's there. They'll know what's not. Talk about that in segment 3, but they'll know what's there and they'll know what isn't there, right? So they'll then come back and decide, okay, is it worth it to do this because we can't get that there? This is what we need. We realize what we can get in the draft. Now it's time for us to reevaluate ourselves and what is in free agency. This is where I think it's going to get tricky because they have to now look at the roster and decide who they can keep and who they can't, right? Even if the players don't fit. It doesn't mean that they're bad players. It just means that they're not a match for what we're doing here. So I do believe that the key to all of this is understanding that they're not just building a team for 2025. I did a mock draft, and I did the mock draft as a little bit of a fact-finding mission too. One of the things I've always said is impossible to do a mock before you do free agency. And I didn't. I actually did free agency, but I didn't tell everybody. Of all the responses I got, there was one guy that says horrible. I said, I agree. It is terrible, especially when you don't ask contextual questions and that. But there were other people. My man Trav hit me. Trav said, well, this means if you did that, it means you did this, you let this guy go with that. And that is what I was trying to elicit. That is exactly the response that I wanted. Because I wanted to show people how hard it is to do the draft before you do free agency. I also wanted people to see the responses that I would get for doing a draft and not telling you who I got in free agency, because both of those things are independent, but they're not. That's the hard part. They're independent, but they're not. I think the draft should be, who are we bringing in? What young talent are we bringing into this organization for the next 5 years? I think free agency should be, okay, who is out there that can help us to get to where we need to get to for the next 1 or 2 years? That's the difference. I think you build through the draft. I think you supplement through free agency, right? So when people saw my mock draft and they didn't see certain positions like center, guess what? I had already signed a center named Drew Dalman from Atlanta. When people didn't see any safety help on my draft, guess what? I had signed Justin Reed from Kansas City and Hufanga from San Francisco. When people saw that I didn't address corner until late with the Dotson kid out at Kansas, they didn't realize I had already signed Paulson Adebo to a contract in free agency. All right. Then when people saw me draft a linebacker in the 3rd round in the Schlesinger kid out of UCLA, They didn't realize I had traded Devin Lloyd, who's only got 1 year left on his contract. All right. When folks didn't see me necessarily address nose tackle because they saw me take the Alexander kid from Toledo, they didn't realize I had signed TJ Slayton to a very, very minimal deal to be a 315-pound reserve at nose tackle behind Devon Hamilton. See, those are the things that folks didn't realize. When I took 2 tight ends, folks didn't realize I moved on from Evan Ingram. And then that only left us 1 tight end on the roster. So I went and got 2. And the only reason I got 2 is because I was making a choice between Mason Taylor and the Delk kid up at not the Delk kid, but the kid from Texas. I was making had a very difficult decision, but I had 3 picks. So I took Mason Taylor, right? And then guess what happened? I got to the other pick that was like 15, 16 picks later, and the other tight end was still there. And I said, why not? Just do it. Take him. That's how I ended up with the draft. I also had addressed guard by signing Patrick McCarry, who's versatile, can play guard and tackle. He's a very good player against the run from Baltimore. I targeted teams like Baltimore and San Francisco because I know they have a whole lot of other things that they're trying to do with the cap, and those players may be guys that they can't afford to keep. And that's why I went for those players. Exactly why I went for those players. That's why I signed Justin Reed instead of signing Javon Holland. So that's what I did. But this goes to show you this is how hard it is. So what do we do? What do we do? Do we all just go back and find players from these old teams that these guys coach from and say, okay, that's who we're going to sign. We're going to sign him. We're going to sign. We're going to just bring. It's like the transfer portal. You get the coach reaches back and gets all of the players that he coached at various schools before, and they bring. I don't think it works that way. I think the Jaguars have some guys that are going to be independent thinkers. So I can tell you right now what's in the draft and what's in free agency. We'll do that in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. What's in the draft and what's in free agency with the Jacksonville Jaguars at their positions of need? I am not aligned with them to the point where I can tell you what they believe are their positions of need, but I'll tell you what I think are their positions of need. So I had to say that because we may get it wrong because they don't feel the same way I feel about people. I don't know if they're going to hang on to Darnell Savage. I don't know if they like the Walker Little signing. I don't know if they like Ezra Cleveland as a guard, because one thing I've noticed with Jaguar fans, there's only 2 or 3 people they want to get rid of. They want to change the center again from Mitch Morse to somebody else. This was just like last year. They need a 3rd edge rusher. And what else do Jaguar fans say we need? Because it's very, very little. It's very little from a team that won 4 games now. It's very little stuff that they want. They want to keep players. I had some people telling me they were the 5th receiver. Folks are on the line and say, we need to keep this guy. And I'm thinking, like, what other than name familiarity makes you feel that that guy's worth keeping? Because I have a hard time figuring that out all the time. It's like they don't want to get rid of anybody. And I'm thinking, like, okay, I know y'all don't like change, but that's what you want, right? You want change, but you can't change without changing. It's going to happen naturally, right? So my thing is I had to look and find out where is the most plentiful, the positions, what is the most plentiful thing. This free agency class ain't that great. And it shouldn't be every year. Teams should keep their great players. You ain't going to find a starting left tackle just walking around the streets in the National Football League. It's just not going to happen, okay? But maybe they don't believe that Walker Little needs it. So let's, for the benefit of the doubt, say the Jaguars are going to go with Walker Little. Let's just say it wasn't all a Trent Baalke decision, that maybe other people had something to do with it. I don't know about that because Baalke was still the GM about 3 weeks after the season ended, and the intent was to keep him. So it probably was his decision. How do you improve the offensive line without changing people? I think you do it with competition. If you have guys that's under contract, though, you have to be very, very responsible in how you allocate funds. So what do? Well, there are a lot of players that can help you on the bottom of that rotation, or there's some that can help you on top. The easiest thing to do for me is if you sign an offensive lineman like Drew Dalman and make him one of the 5 highest paid centers in the league, probably maybe 5 or 6, then what that's going to do is that's a proven player. You know, you got that part licked, right? If you sign the guard, Will Fries or Will Freeze, however you say his name, from the Colts, that tells you you got your right guard and your center fixed if you go with those two. Now you can leave it there. That's going to help you. That's going to help you tremendously. Or you can then go out and get guys like Joe Noteboom, who was a veteran backup with the Rams that they should know very well, right? But what you're getting him for is he's your veteran swing tackle type, right? Then maybe you go into the draft also and you get a guy like Donovan Jackson, he's 6'4", 320 pounds. He's played both guard and tackle at Ohio State. If you can somehow move back and finagle your way back a little bit, and I know there's a kid out of Missouri that I love too, man. He can really, really play. I got to figure out how to say his name the correct way, but he's a really good player. Some people don't know whether he's a guard or a tackle, but he's a people mover. And then what happens is you get a guy on a rookie deal, and now you have competition. And if you can't stand competition, get out of the kitchen, because you don't need to be in the starting lineup. They're going to add players at some point. I do think this is a draft where you can get two young guys in the top 4 rounds. I like the wide receiver class because the Jaguars aren't looking for a number 1. When you're not looking for a number 1, it's easier to find someone to come in and help you. And people getting on me about the Luther Burden. I picked Luther Burden III. I don't see him as just a slot, and I see him as a speedy playmaker who you're asking to come in here and be a second receiver to Brian Thomas Jr. That's exactly the kind of guy that could also benefit this team, but to no avail, right? I think in free agency, you address the safety position. I think in the draft, you mainly want to go after best player available, but guys that are ready to help you at critical positions. Wide receiver is one of them. I think they'll do a really, really good job of finding a wide out. If they don't go defensive tackle early in the draft, I'm cool with it, because this draft is very, very deep with defensive tackles. I just think they need to really look at offense. I think it has to be offensive line. I think it has to be, if Travis Hunter falls to number 5, it's a no-brainer. I think you take him and you play him. He's on a rookie deal, and you play him opposite of Tyson Campbell. That's the thing that I'm looking at. Just to hit a home run early on a guy, but then the draft doesn't end. Even if you get a good player, the draft doesn't end that early. I mean, after round 1, you have round 2, you have multiple picks in round 3 and round 4. This is where I think the Gladstone effect is really going to help this team, because he has shown the propensity to find players in those spots that other teams may have overlooked, or that people are saying, yeah, he's okay, but he doesn't. People that rank prospects are going to maybe knock them down a little bit, but their production, their intangibles, all of the things that make them who they are, that they're rich in, like he said, that he can come and take those guys and plug those guys in. I fully expect to get participation and contributions from at least 5 or 6 rookies next year, because they've done a good job of onboarding guys out of college and bringing them in. And the system that they're going to run and the things that they're going to do, and I believe their formations, all of that, and the whole brain trust of this team has changed. It's like it's gone from, if you could have a symbol for what the brain trust of this team has been, it's gone from a guy flexing his muscle to a guy flexing his brain who also has muscles. And I think that that's a very, very refreshing thing. I think it leads to the Jaguars not getting off the slow starts like they have in the past. I think it leads to them being able to not only play with the lead, but to continue to be aggressive in how they play, to be an attacking football team. And believe it or not, this all sounds like a whole bunch of word soup where I'm talking about people that throw the ball around all the time. Nah, I'm talking about folks that run the ball, that design offense a certain way, that are very, very determined and very, very deliberate in their attack. And they're just going to go out and get players that can help them do that. I'm interested to see exactly where they find them. It is a mystery to me how they find them, how they build it. I'll gather more data, obviously, after one full off season that'll kind of give us an idea. But I'm grasping for it, man. I'm looking around at past drafts and guys that they picked before, positions that they valued before. where the success came from. And I'm really, really looking forward to trying to figure this out with everybody else. But that's why I did that mock without telling anybody what I signed in free agency. So I can now double back and tell you exactly what I was thinking. It's going to be hard to figure out what they're thinking, but I tell you what, when they do whatever they do, and once they do it, I'll be telling you about it here on Locked On Jaguars, and I'll be talking about it on Locked On NFL as usual, every day, twice a day. First of all, Tyler Rowland in the morning, like a double shot of espresso, will wake you up with the NFL AM show, and then around 2 o'clock every day, me in the barbershop, Tony Wiggins, giving it to you like you can't get it anywhere else with the use of local experts that know the league like no other. All right, man, y'all take care. Start getting ready to look at the combine and write your notes and get ready for the season where we compare and contrast and talk about guys we like and guys we don't like. It's a very exciting time to be a fan of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I'm glad you guys tuned in to Locked On Jaguars for your information. We'll see you next time.